It is indeed an honour to join you here today to mark the International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. We are here today because the remembrance of the Holocaust is a responsibility of each and every one of us. On this day, we come together to remember, reflect and look forward. It is an opportunity for us all to pause and reflect on the millions of lives lost and the impact that loss has had on all of us. The International Day of Commemoration was established by a United Nations General Assembly resolution in November 2005, and that designated today, 27th of January, as the Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. I should say that today's event would not have been possible without the planning, contributions and commitment from the organising committee of representatives from the United Nations Information Centre, the Embassy of Israel, the Jewish community in the ACT, the Rotary Club of Canberra Griffin, and the United Nations Association of Australia ACT. Our sincere thanks to them all. I'd also like to acknowledge that this ceremony is being held on the lands of the Ngunnawal Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be here today. Our ceremony will commence will include musical pieces, and we will hear from three speakers. We will be asking flowers to be placed in vases near the peace bell to symbolise the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. This will also be accompanied by a musical item. This will then be followed by the striking of the peace bell and a minute's silence. But to begin our ceremony today, we have the privilege of hearing from a renowned violinist, Ilya Isakovich. Ilya was born in Kryvyi Rog, Ukraine. He started playing the violin at the age of 6 in the City School of Music, and in 1991 graduated, performing the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto with the Dnipro Symphony Orchestra. He's lived all his life to that stage in that very difficult area of Ukraine. Ilya emigrated to Israel in 1991 and had an active musical career before moving to Australia in 2004, taking a position with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, where he still performs today. Ilya will now perform the theme from Schindler's List, which was composed by the American composer John Williams.
We gather today to commemorate the lives of the millions of victims who perished during one of the darkest, most destructive periods in human history. Only this morning, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Australia's peak elected national Jewish body, released its annual report on anti-Semitism in Australia. The report shows that even here in Australia in 2022, anti-Semitic incidents are on the rise, stemming from neo-Nazi groups, radical conspiracy theorists and anti-Israel activists, and unfortunately various groups on university campuses. The You may not know that apart from Israel, Australia is home to the highest per capita number of Holocaust survivors, many of whom left Europe after the war looking for a new home, looking to leave their past behind, and perhaps wishing to get as far away from Europe as possible. Many survivors realise the importance of telling their story, of bearing witness for those who did not survive, and of ensuring that never again is more than a mere slogan. Today marks 78 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, and as we move further away from those events, and there are fewer eyewitnesses, we see the gaps in knowledge, the lack of awareness of history, the distortion of truth, and even denial of these incomprehensible events. A recent survey commissioned by the Gandel Foundation shows a high percentage of Australians have little or no knowledge of the Holocaust. Over half the respondents didn't know that Hitler assumed power through democratic elections, and only 20% of those surveyed knew that the Nuremberg laws, the anti-Semitic and racist laws enacted in 1935, were discriminatory laws directed against the Jewish people. The survey also showed that a higher level of Holocaust awareness is associated with warmer feelings towards Jewish people and other minorities, as well as vulnerable groups such as asylum seekers and First Nations people. My late father, Professor Colin Tatz, was a distinguished political scientist with a lifelong experience in race relation issues, who formed the Centre for Comparative Genocide Studies at Macquarie University and wrote extensively about genocide, including the Holocaust. His work demonstrated the power of reason and scholarship to combat the destructive irrationality of racism. One of his strongest messages was that we have an obligation to make sure genocides do not happen to other peoples. We must all seek to curb and eventually prevent this crime of crimes. The battle against anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of intolerance cannot be complete without education. Knowing the history of the Holocaust and understanding the devastating impact of disregard for human rights, of rampant hate speech, and vile prejudice and stereotypes is the only path for a stronger, inclusive, and tolerant society. We must reject any denial or distortion of the Holocaust and condemn all manifestations of religious intolerance, incitement, harassment, or violence against persons or communities based on ethnic origin or religious belief. The Executive Council of Australia Jury Anti-Semitism report notes, to fight anti-Semitism, you first need to define it. With anti-Semitism on the rise, the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism is a vital educational tool in identifying and calling out contemporary anti-Semitism in all its forms. And that definition is as follows. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. The report goes on to say that we need education not only about World War II and the Holocaust, but also about contemporary anti-Semitism and the multiple forms that it takes, as well as anti-Indigenous, anti-African, anti-Asian, anti-Muslim, anti-Hindu and anti-LGBTIQA+ animosity. These are commonly held prejudices in Australia, and we can only begin to address them when students learn about the specifics of each of them and why they are false and harmful to all of us. So to end anti-Semitism, we must end racism and discrimination for all peoples. Here in Canberra, we will soon be able to learn about the reality of the Holocaust with the development of the Canberra Holocaust Museum and Education Centre. The federal government supports the former government's aspiration to establish a Holocaust museum in each capital city to ensure that our children learn from the past and work towards a brighter, more tolerant and inclusive future. These museums will help educate and inform future generations. I finish with the words of Elie Wiesel, one of the most renowned Holocaust survivors. He says, I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men or women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the centre of the universe. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Could I now welcome our second speaker, the Deputy Head of Mission of the Israel Embassy to Australia, Chris Cantor, to speak.
Dear Shoah survivors, ministers, members of the ACT Legislative Assembly, President of the ACT Jewish Community, and members of the Jewish Community, UNHCR Regional Representative, President and Governor of the Rotary Club of Canberra, heads of missions and colleagues from the diplomatic community, Deputy Head of the German Embassy to Australia. Dear all, it is a poignant moment gathering here on the tranquil shore of Lake Burley Griffin. Our tranquil surroundings should give us a pause to reflect on the horrors that took place in Europe 80 years ago, on the 6 million victims assassinated by the Nazis and their aides, on the Shoah survivors, and on the lessons we should learn, or we should have learned, of the most terrible human tragedy in history. We are witnessing growing parts of society denying or ignoring those events. Anti-Semitism is enjoying a truly worrying global resurgence. The beast has raised its head again. Sometimes deliberately, sometimes in a very banal way. The discourse in social media channels could be appalling and remind us that these lessons have not remained yet. Here in Australia too, incidents of Jews being targeted at schools and universities are especially concerning. It reminds us of the importance of educating, informing, and sensitizing young people about the Holocaust. Even though Canberra in 2023 is a lifetime removed and thousands of miles away from the events of the Holocaust, Australia nevertheless has an important role to play in continuing remembrance and the education of the Shoah. Australia is home to a thriving Jewish community, of which a significant proportion are Holocaust survivors and their direct descendants. It means that the living memory of the terrors of the Holocaust can still be found amongst us, even though the number of survivors are becoming fewer with each passing year. So it is appropriate that in 2019 Australia became the 33rd member of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, a global movement dedicated to preserving the memory of the Holocaust. It is also encouraging that the federal government is supporting the establishment of Holocaust museums and education centers in every state and territory capital. Just as important is the growing adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism by federal and state governments, legislators, public institutions, and civil society organizations across Australia. And in this regard, it was especially encouraging to learn of the University of Melbourne's adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism earlier this week. I hope that other universities and institutions will soon follow this example. Our challenge is to remain constantly vigilant to small acts of intolerance, persecution, and bigotry, because when rare transgressions become common, they also become accepted. And then these transgressions are accepted, they become legitimized. And once mankind's worst instincts become legitimized, it can unleash an unstoppable torrent of violence and brutality. So even on these tranquil shores where we're meeting today, let this spell of peace remind us of the terrible human cost of racism. And in a few minutes, after we heard the echo across the waters, I invite you to contemplate anew what the poet John Donne meant 3 centuries before the Holocaust, when he wrote, "Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore, ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." And in this special day, we, as Israelis, also take the oath of Leolam No, never again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Our final speaker today is the regional representative from the United Nations, Commissioner for Refugees, Adrian Edwards, who will read a message on behalf of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Remembrance, as just heard. I'm the regional representative here for UNHCR, the Refugee Agency. And I have a message for you from Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Antonio is someone several of you will know quite well. He was here in Canberra a number of years ago in his then capacity as the head of the Refugee Agency. And I think today, here there's a number of reasons, including right here by the Peace Bell, why this is particularly poignant somehow. I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respects to leaders past, present and emerging. Ministers, excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and as I say, friends, students, I bring you warm greetings today from the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I'm honoured to share with you his message. Today, we honour the memory of the victims of the Holocaust. We remember the 6 million Jewish children, women and men, as well as the Roma, Sinti, the people with disabilities and countless others who perished. We reflect on the millions of individual lives cut short, the millions of futures stolen away. As we mourn the loss of so many and so much, we also recognise that the Holocaust was not inevitable. No genocide ever is. It was the culmination of millennia of anti-Semitic hate. The Nazis could only move with calculated cruelty from the discrimination of Europe's Jews to their annihilation because so few stood up and so many stood by. It was the deafening silence, both at home and abroad, that emboldened them. The alarm bells were ringing from the very beginning. Hate speech and disinformation, contempt for human rights and the rule of law, the glorification of violence and tales of racial supremacy, disdain for democracy and diversity. In remembering the Holocaust, we recognise threats to freedom, dignity and humanity, including today and in our own time. Today, indeed, in the face of growing economic discontent and political instability, escalating white supremacist terrorism and surging hate and religious bigotry, we must be more outspoken than ever. We must never forget, nor allow others to ever forget, distort or deny the Holocaust. Today and every day, let us resolve to never again remain silent in the face of evil, and to always defend the dignity and rights of all. Thank you.
If anyone wishes to stay back and strike the Canberra Rotary Peace Bell in recognition of the occasion, please feel free to come forward. One of our Rotary members will assist you. The Peace Bell's theme this year is, of course, May Peace Prevail on Earth. So thank you for attending. That concludes our ceremony, and we wish you well.